Thank you for your promptness, and I will get us underway. Erin, you want to set up the slides?
Yes.
Tammy, it might be you. Tammy has a question. Yep. All right. Erin, you want to get us started? There we go. All right, welcome. We are going to start with a review. Our co-chairs will be covering some initial material with you. And so you will see this is dated December 20th. It is because we are going to be looking at slides. Just doing a quick preview. We're all adult learners. We've been in a lot of places since we were last together. And so we want to do a bit of a, refresher. And then we're going to be diving into questions that you are able to help us answer. We're going to be focusing today on, by the time we're done, we are going to be seeking your input on initial data requests for DOE. That's today. More about subsequent sessions from the co-chairs as we go along. So stay tuned on that front. Next slide, please. So we have group norms. These should look familiar to you. We were using these in the earlier sessions. We are encouraging you to promote a spirit of inquiry and to pause, paraphrase, and probe for specificity. If you have questions or you want clarity, we really want you putting ideas on the table, and we want to be able to pay attention to your own needs and questions and those of others, and always presume positive intentions. You're welcome to continue to use the chat to ask your questions and share responses. And as I have done in the past, I'll monitor that and thread that into the verbal discussion that's happening. If you'd like to speak, we encourage you to raise your hand, or if that feature isn't available to you for some reason, you're welcome to wave, and I'll do my best to keep an eye out for you. We're going to do our best. We started relatively on time. We will end on time. We recognize that you have other obligations, and we will invite you, to the extent to which you are comfortable, to silence your electronics and disengage from them throughout the presentation, knowing that people are managing multiple demands, and it can be tricky. So I will turn the floor over to the co-chairs for a preview of some information. And then we're going to be gathering information from you. And just a reminder, along with the slide deck, we did send out a primer for this discussion to try to set us up for success and maximize the limited time we have together. So if you have that in front of you, that's great. And if you don't, we're going to be pulling from it. So I'll do my best as we're entering into discussion stages to frame what's in there as needed and as helpful. So with that, Tiffany and Nancy, I will turn the floor over to you.
Great. My name is Nancy Cronin. You asked me to be one of your chairs. Thank you very much.
And I'm Tiffany Haskell. Happy to be here.
Really happy to be here. So Tiffany and I met and we said, it would be great to anchor ourselves in the resolve again. So next slide. So our shared task in this resolve, next slide, is basically to comment on a process, a timeline, and an implementation plan. And this is what the Department of Education must do in the implementation plan. Next slide. So they must create an advisory committee, and we are that person. There are 14 representative bodies. We have the list on the website. And what Tiffany and I would like you to do, and Tiffany, please interrupt me whenever you want, please, is while we're going through the resolve and going through the work that we're supposed to be commenting on and advising on, think to yourself, what kind of information will we need to be able to do that? What will we need to know? Next slide. So there needs to be a report. It's supposed to be due February 1st. I believe they've asked for a little bit extension for that. Next slide. And they need to give an implementation plan, and it has to have 8 components. And we're going to go through the components in a minute in more detail, but very briefly, the implementation plan must include the PCG report components. What is the role of private providers? It must address district items like capacity, staffing, space, administrative oversight, transportation, and others. Funding. How are they going to protect current CDS employees? What are the benchmarks that need to be met before and during transition? A detailed plan to evaluate progress with the transition. How will we know things are going the way we wanted to go? And recommendations regarding 3-year-olds. Next slide. So that's quite a bit. We have a lot to look at and advise on. That's quite a chunk of work. And so we're going to look at each one of these components slowly and ask, what do we need to know? And hopefully you all got the primer. The first is the PCG report, and there's a link to the report here. Is there anything else that we need to know regarding this slide? Tiffany.
I also think that with each of these slides that we're going to go through, the department already has information to share, progress that they've made, things that have already been put in place, things of that nature, which is why the third bullet on the slide just kind of starts us out with an update from the department, because we wouldn't want to spend any time talking about questions that the department could just share with us in advance relative to components of the PCG report being in the implementation plan, for example.
Exactly. But we did decide as a team that we would focus less on getting the DOE updates during this time as finding out what's available and seeing what else we want to ask. So our next meeting will be getting the updates, which I think is important. Next slide. And I think this is the beginning. Is there anything else regarding the PCG report? The primer didn't have anything on it. Seeing none, next slide.
Well,
Okay.
I guess I would just say, direct my question at Aaron, the same one I just sort of summarized. Okay. I'd love to hear from the department about this. Like, I don't think I have to. I'm happy to ask questions, but I would just love to hear from the department on this.
Aaron, you wanna speak?
Yes. So what happened, the PCG report came out, I think December 2020. And that is when the work began for myself, Roberta, and Jamie in terms of looking at that plan and detailing. They proposed a timeline. So what we did was, in respect to the asks of this bill, we looked at what their recommendation is, not knowing that there were certain things on that report that had already been completed, such as the ICC Council reestablished. The ICC is the that's a Part B example, a Part C example, but some of the things had been updated and already reviewed. We reviewed those things with you that we've already done, right? We're already looking at job descriptions. We're already looking at staff demand, the staff survey we've done to see what our capacity is in regards to transitioning these students back into public school. So I don't know, Tiffany, we looked at, there were like 32 different recommendations in that report, and we studied all of them. And other than saying that in our report, we're going to be outlining the detailed timeline that's associated with this group, with the recommendation that I made at the last meeting. I'm not sure if there were specific data that you were looking for.
I guess my question is the legislature expecting the details about the components of the PCG report in this implementation plan?
They are expecting that, and it's interwoven through the entire report.
Through your report?
Yes. Well, and through the work that we've done, like when we gave you the slideshow and said, this is what we've done before even the bill came out. Those things were all like PCG report based. you know, like looking at staff job descriptions, looking at capacity, looking at, you know, looking at the fiscal piece of how much these services cost, looking at the, also, we had to, you know, develop preschool classrooms. So looking at the cost of those kinds of things we were already doing, and they are integral. So it's all interwoven.
Mhm.
That makes sense. If, however, you know, this is an opportunity for us to ask questions and for us to go back and provide them to you in writing. One thing that we may be able to do, Tiffany, is that you could go and look at that report, and or others could look at that report and ask specific questions they have pertaining to a specific area, maybe.
One thing that
Excellent.
I'm hoping at the next time, or as soon as possible, that we can see the report that you've drafted, but when might you be ready to share that with the advisory committee?
I have to say that I can share components of the report. I believe that the report has to be shared with the legislature before it can be shared with anybody. But there are components of that report. For instance, you know, the timeline, a more detailed breakdown of the timeline, those kinds of things we can share.
All right, we might want to check on that. I think we're supposed to comment on it before you share it with the
I can
legislature.
check on that too, Nancy.
Let's check on that timing, yeah. Because I think we're supposed to comment in the development of it, not in just the response of it. So, okay, all right. Let's go to the next slide, because there's going to be some real deep stuff that we are going to start getting into in a second. All right. So the one thing that we're supposed to be commenting on is to define a role for the department and regional offices to contract with private providers in situations in which a school administrative unit is unable to provide the appropriate level of services to meet the individual education program of a child with a disability. That's kind of a meat. And in the primer that was sent, some of the questions that we were thinking about included, well, how many kids are in Maine receiving Part B 619 by county and district? What's the current education settings on the continuum of special purpose private schools by county serving CDS kids? What's the number of kids served in childcare, Head Start, natural setting with itinerant services, number of CDS kids on a wait list and by service, and how are contracts working? How does CDS monitor progress of children? How does DOE monitor CDS currently in an oversight capacity? So that starts the conversation. What do you think of those questions? What else might we need to know?
And if there are things, thanks, Nancy, if there are things on this list that you just reviewed, Nancy, that you would like to understand from a slightly different vantage point, or you'd like to add on to, you know, that's a perfectly valid, you know, thing to offer up. So we're just going to create space right now and invite your input on this. What do you think of the ones that Nancy and Tiffany have identified sort of as examples? Because what we just heard are examples of information you might like. Are there anything you'd like questions about those, or questioning how they might be helpful, or other items you'd like to add for the list? And with that, I'll just open the floor. We're going to do our best to capture anything that you suggest on the screen, so you can make sure that we're capturing it appropriately. And then we'll also check in with Aaron and others to make sure that they're clear about the list, because the goal will be to gather this information from you today, and then for them to provide a written response to your lines, your questions. So with that, I'll just open the floor. Thoughts about what's here, questions about what's here in terms of the examples that Tiffany and Nancy have created, additions you would like to make around this in terms of the role. Floor is open. Heather, hi.
Hi, I just want to ask a clarifying question. Is the private providers, is that referring to the people working directly with the children, like the service providers, like the OTs, PTs? Okay,
Yes,
It
Heather is
also
nodding
is,
yes.
it's also private preschools.
Okay, so yeah, I think just in that above language, a thing that would strike out to me was when they are unable to provide the services. I struggle with that line because I think somewhere that can play into the least restrictive environment. So you could have a public school with a pre-K class, a public pre-K classroom in their building. However, a child might be already in a childcare program where there's developed relationships, you know, trust and all of that. And you know, they're developing, they're building relationships and then potentially being removed from that program because the services could be provided in the public school versus looking at how do we bring the services to that child in their least restrictive environment in the moment. So I just want to kind of point that out because the language before seems the preferred setting would be with the public school.
As one of the authors of the questions that we put in there, that was not the intent. It was more, the intent was to figure out who's out there. So, so if there was a way we could say that differently, I'd love it. Or is there a question? So number of kids served in childcare, Head Start in natural setting with does that capture it, or is there another question to make sure that we're capturing the children in all those typically developing settings?
Heather, when you were speaking and Erin, you were just capturing this, does what Erin wrote, Heather, capture it? Or is there another way to phrase it?
Did you write it in the chat, Erin? I don't know.
No,
Oh, you
that's
mean
a
on
good
the
one.
It's on the screen. Do you want me to read it? Will that help?
Yeah, I like how do we bring services to children in least restrictive? Yeah, and I think the settings, if we're just super specific, private school, you know, public pre-K. And I would even say in the settings, we might want to be as specific as the type of childcare programs, the family childcare, the center-based, the faith-based, you know, I think when we're specific, it helps a lot.
So by type, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, yeah. And the goal here is for us to capture what your intent. So if we're right, I'll check with you, but if I miss something, please speak up. That's the goal, right? Yeah. Okay. Other things here in terms of information you'd like to know? Think of them as, I guess, data requests is technically the language, but it doesn't have to be data in the literal sense. Hi, Sarah.
Just going off of Heather's point about that, we do have a lot of kids that have, you know, really developed great relationships in their private preschools. But then that also, in terms of providing services, it makes things a lot more difficult because a child that's in, you know, one school district, it's much easier to get a speech therapist to see all those kids if they're in one school because there's no travel time. They can group kids versus if we have kids at all of these different private preschools, that can almost double the amount of time that a provider is spending and they can see half as many kids. So I think that is really important information to get of, are we intending that we're going to provide these services in public schools? What districts are we doing that in? What districts are we not? And looking at the additional travel time if the private preschools are spread out.
Okay, let's give Erin a minute to catch up with us and see if we're capturing what you're interested in, Sarah.
I don't know if I'm catching this.
She's squishing her lips, so I think we need to tinker. Sarah, what would do that?
Yeah, how, you know, just something that we need to identify additional time that providers will spend traveling if we're servicing children in private preschools of parent choice versus if we're providing the services in one, you know, public school location.
Okay.
And then that also impacts the ability to group kids. If we have one kid at each private preschool, they obviously can't be grouped versus if we have 5 in, one location.
I also have a comment to piggyback on that when everyone's ready.
Thank you. Heather, I'm just noting that you had, I think we, in the chat, I think we have to understand the number of children served outside of their own school districts too. Children can attend childcare an hour away from their homes. Thank you. Yeah. Who just said that? Sandy, I see your hand is up.
Denise did.
Okay. Let me just check in with Sandy. Hi, Sandy. And then Denise, I'll be right with you.
That's good.
I think one of the questions that we might want to talk about or answer is, are we expecting it to be the same model as it is currently? And I see people shaking their heads. And then if it is transitioning to the public school responsibility, it's more of a transition of those providers and the fiscal management piece. And so having that ability to have that time to transition, not only the providers, but the public school, and get those systems set up, would allow for the same model of service. I'm picturing it on my end as a special education director. So is that what we're trying to answer here? What that role of private providers is? Is it going to change? Or are we as a group expecting it to remain somewhat the same?
Go ahead, Nancy.
I think that's a very important question. I think for this stage, we were thinking, what is it now? And then this group needs to have a conversation about what we advise it to become. So I'm not, but what I'm hearing from you is you might want to know, what is the department's ideas about that? Is the department thinking about it changing or something else so that we can respond to it? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I just think having clarity around it would support how we're kind of developing this role. And if it's going to stay the same, that's fine. I think directors just need to know that and have the right amount of support to help coordinate it, right? And then if it's changing, that would be good to know now. Like, are we changing it because it's not working? And what would that change be? And maybe Roberta has more to add to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for today, and what we're hoping to do is get information and data requests, and then discussion of that nature would happen, sort of down the line, acknowledging that we're in this, and we'll go over the timeline later in the presentation. But this idea, the question there is, the DOE recommending making changes to how programming is delivered? Erin, is that something, and Roberta, you're in not today, because the goal, we're not going to be responding to information requests today because we don't have enough time, but we're going to be compiling them so they can respond in writing, and then we can all have it together. Is this doable? What Sandy's, yeah, okay. I'm seeing them both nod, so I'm going with nods right now. Thanks, Sandy. Hi, Denise. And then Lori, hi, I see you.
Hi there. While we were talking about providers going to private preschools, one of the questions I had is, are we going to require or expect that these private preschool / daycares would have the room available for services to occur in if outside providers were to be going to their program to provide services? That's often a problem that we run into, is that the little child may need speech therapy, but there's no place to hold it within that setting.
Is there anything worse than when 23 people are watching you type? All right. Denise, does that answer your question? Or does this
Perfect.
capture, my apologies, capture?
Yes, it sure
Thank
does.
you.
Yeah.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. I wanted to just expand a little bit on the transportation barrier. Certainly there's going to be a role for private providers, especially in Southern Maine, where they're just, the districts are not ready to take on the numbers of children that they have. And it'll be important to develop those partnerships with districts. But my big concern is if children are in care not within their district. Right now, we have many children waiting within CDS, and one of the big barriers is transportation, and that's one of the reasons I'm so in favor of this move is because we have openings. We've had openings within our preschools that we've developed, and we cannot get children to school because there's no transportation. And I actually just saw an article this morning about the federally bus driver qualifications are being lowered because districts do not have enough bus drivers to get children to school within their district. So I'm a little worried about thinking about, having a child maybe an hour away, close to where their parents work, out of their district, and then thinking the district might be responsible to transport those children to school or provide service providers an hour away. So I think we really have to dig into that more. I thought, Nancy, the intention was if the district wasn't ready to provide the service, they would partner, not so much we would have the district sending people out all over the county to serve children wherever they were. Maybe you can clarify that, if that's what I thought the initial language was.
But I think what we're doing right now is simply going through what are the components of the resolve. And I think you provide a very good transition to the next slide, frankly.
Okay.
Which and then asking questions, which is that this plan that that the department is doing must address at minimum what's the school administrative unit capacity, which I think you were talking a lot about there, Lori. Unit capacity, staffing and physical space, administrative oversight, transportation, curriculum and assessments, data systems, health and safety related considerations. And again, looking at how will we know what the suggestions are and how to advise, what kind of questions do we have to be able to do that? And what the primer has suggested for starting places, and this is a long list. How many SAUs are in Maine? How many SAUs are in Maine with universal pre-Ks? And of those, what's their size? How many 4-year-olds are they served? How many 4-year-olds are served with an IEP within the general classroom, as opposed to 4-year-olds served with an IEP in a different setting? SAUs serving CDS kids currently. What's the size of their districts? What are the pilots that have with MOUs and what does it look like? What's the number of incoming 3-year-olds fall 2022 by district? How about 4-year-olds? How about 5-year-olds by district? Is that just this year? There's some reports that fall 2022 numbers are double what they typically see for 5-year-olds. Is that what the department's seeing as well? What is the draft plan to aggregate SAU readiness? Have you done, can we see copies of results from recently done surveys or a draft of proposed SAU readiness assessments or checklists that include capacity, staffing, additional administrative duties, physical space? Plan to describe and educate SAU on the difference in duties regarding child find between 5 and 22 and 4-year-olds. How does the DOE currently provide oversight to ensure equitable special education services? What is the plan to define DOE oversight for 4 to 5? Describe description and copies of curriculum and assessments currently used. And what is the existing data system? And is it compatible with what's there now? And what is the connection between existing data systems and main care billing? Whew, there's a lot in that primer for you to consider, and consider what else do we need. But this really is a very dense question. And now I'm going to leave it to you to discuss this and see what else needs to be asked. You could see why we had to send this ahead of time.
Yeah, this is a good example of where we sincerely hope you have that primer in front of you. And if you don't, and you repeat something, please don't, and you just don't know because you don't have it in front of you, don't worry. Let me just do a quick check-in with the DOE staff. Are the questions that are, or the data requests that are on the example list, one thing in preparation for this meeting that we all talked about with the co-chairs was doing periodic check-ins during today's meeting and saying, is this information available? And I want to just check in and say, generally, is the information that's being requested available, DOE staff, CDS staff?
Yes, it is
Okay.
available.
Okay.
We have some of it. There's also, I just found this out, there's a map of preschools on the preschool page of the DOE website. But there's also some things that are in progress, surveys that are in progress at this point that we don't have the actual results from, but people would want to know, we can certainly tell you what surveys are being conducted right now. We also have MEPRI, who supports research for the legislative body and who's working on these bills with us as well, so we're planning research with them as well. So yes, we have a lot of that information already.
All right, good. That's great. Additional things or questions about, thank you, Nancy, so much for running through that list because I know it's long, the example list. Questions about what's on that list or other things you think you might find helpful? Hi, Howie.
Hi, excuse me. My question was just around, I don't understand currently how kind of the laws work in terms of parents transporting their child to the service. Do we always have to pick them up? What are the rules?
Okay, thanks. Great. Others, things you'd like to know that you think would be helpful to your charge?
Is there anything on that list that you don't need to, that we should take off?
I'm allowing silence longer than usual because I think people are processing. Okay, let's move along. And if something comes up through our discussion, we can always flip back.
Right, the next is specific, provides specificity regarding funding through the state and the main care program that does not flow through the essential programs and services funding formula. So in the primer, what you have for that one is CDS currently billing main care? And if so, what are the codes for what related services and under what codes? How about day treatment, RCS, case management, and other medically necessary services? And then what is the proposed funding method that does not flow through EPS? What is the department thinking about how to make that happen? So what else might we ask to get through this very, very dense and important point so that we can advise on it? I have another one just because how often does CDS look at asking for different funding or drawing down other funding? One thing about CDS that I've always noted is you can't know what kids are coming up. It's a much more rolling admission than what schools typically experience. How is that managed?
Yeah, and that seems like, Nancy, you're asking to understand the process, right? Like, how do you go about that? What intervals, like that kind of thing?
Yes, because schools are going to, if schools take it on, they're going to need to know that,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like town meetings and
Sure.
figuring out town budgets, which is a game all of in and of itself.
Okay. Let me do a quick check-in. DOE CDS staff, are the requests around, what CDS is currently billing main care for? That information, I presume, is all available, but I don't want to make any assumptions.
That information is available.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Jillian. Private insurance is also currently accessed with CDS children. Would this still happen with SAUs? Thank you.
I'm not sure if the primer, and I think we just chatted about it a little bit, but just to be clear, it seems to me that in order to make a plan for paying for these services under each SAU, it would be important to know how much the current costs are. So I just don't know if the primer is clear. And then of course that's, main care, private insurance, CDS pay.
Thanks, Tiffany. I don't think that is in there. It's good ahead. Okay. All right. Let's move along. Thank you.
All right. The next piece of the resolve is to include a plan to protect current CDS system employees from any negative or unintended consequences related to retirement and provisions. And pensions and the federal windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. There was a lot of concern from the legislative committee last year about how CDS employees would be impacted. The primer doesn't have much. It has what is the proposed plan to protect current CDS employees from shifting from a SSI model to a main retirement model. And of course, a main retirement model means you have to work somewhere for 5 years to be vested. Is there anything else that we need to know? I'm really relying on CDS employees to give some ideas.
Other things you'd want to better understand about protecting the current employees? Sarah?
I think also just if this is moving to a public school model, if there's different certifications, if jobs will change slightly, if duties are going to change, and if there's additional certification needed or anything related to that.
Thank you. Nancy?
Could there be a provision in the legislation, or would there be positives, or could there be a provision in the legislation that provides existing CDS employees first chance at opening jobs, kind of like internal job applicants that exist in schools?
Nancy, did you mean in the public school or in
Well, I figure if CDS employees were displaced because we moved people to schools, could there be an opportunity for them to have a kind of an internal opportunity to apply for a job, similar to if somebody worked in a district, they often have an opportunity to apply before it goes out.
And I just jump in with a comment about that, and I'm sure Howie probably knows better than I do, but we have our teachers unions that we need to be well aware of. And I'm not sure how that would play with that. Just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Sandy.
How
Yeah,
would this, perhaps a question would be, how would that be affected with existing, what is it called? I'm in it in my own, it's the negotiations of the agreement.
Collective bargaining agreements.
Yeah, I think maybe put that out there to see how that is.
Heather, I see you just dropped in the chat, are the background checks transferable from CDS to SAUs? Thank you. Denise?
I guess my question would be, is every CDS current employee going to have an opportunity for a new job? So it sounds to me like some will and some won't, but I'm not quite sure. I know that that would be a question that I have and maybe others would have.
Thank you. I'm going to check in with DOE staff in a minute, but first I want to hear Tiffany, you have your hand up.
I would just add that, you know, one of the things that I'm concerned about, and one of the things I heard the legislature speak to last spring, is that part of this question to me seems, and in their explanation, I think they would agree, that part of the plan about protecting current CDS employees is also how do we prevent any mass, you know, hiatus and keep the sites open and not discourage the CDS staff that, you know, the whole state wants to shut them down. That's not what the message that we want. So how do we protect those sites and through the transition? None of the transition will work if everybody leaves the regional sites.
Thank you.
Before they should.
Yeah.
Exodus, thank you.
All right, yeah. Sandy?
I can honestly say I do not think it will be a problem, considering how much of an issue we're having finding special education teachers and coordinators and regular ed teachers, ed techs, anything right now. So I foresee that they will be welcomed with open arms. Please come.
Thank you. DOE CDS staff, given the questions that have been offered up, are they answerable in your estimation, or which ones might prove challenging? Anything on this list we should sort of set expectations about?
Yeah, I don't think we can answer number two. We can't legislate that an SAU provide an opportunity to someone over another opportunity. So I do not think we will be able, we could look internally, if CDS were going to have different positions, we could potentially do something like that within CDS. We haven't planned that. We are looking at individual staff transition plans and also increased professional development, but I don't think that we could answer number two. This bullet right here.
Okay. Everything else, let's leave it for the record, but acknowledge. Yeah, thank you.
And I'm not sure that we could answer how a SAU's teachers union would also, respond to our staff and their availability. I think that's also not quite answerable.
Okay. So we know these are key considerations and they're not something we can respond to. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add to this list before we transition? All right, thanks. Let's keep moving.
I think we now have an opportunity to start going into an opportunity to give a little bit more feedback. What I'd like to do is go through 2 slides relatively quickly, and then because they're related. So this slide, they're supposed to provide steps, benchmarks, and milestones for the department and CDS and school administrative units need to meet before and during any transition period, including but not limited to components under the must meet slide that we talked about, and an independent project manager that might not be employed by DOE. Next slide. Next slide. And a detailed plan to evaluate progress of the transition plan. Provide a detailed plan of the evaluation and assessment tools to be developed to determine whether the department, CDS, and school units are meeting steps, benchmarks, and milestones. So these 2 slides really have to do with what are the steps, benchmarks, and milestones that needs to be incorporated in the transition plan. And maybe we could talk a little bit about what kind of components are we expecting to see in the plan so that we know, how will we know things are going at the right space and time? Any ideas about how we can measure and look at benchmarks or suggested? And of course, what's on the primer is what is the detailed plan that we can respond to, and how will the department engage and evaluate the progress of the SAUs?
Other ways that you will know, I always think of it as, how are we going to know that the SAUs are ready? Heather?
I would just say, and I don't really know where that fits in, but I really feel like each SAU is going to have to do their own kind of landscape analysis of what they have, like all those questions we referred to up above. You know, what are the number of children in your district? You know, so each school district is going to have to know their each unique information. You know, and certainly in my perfect world, every SAU would have a facilitator to help them do that, someone who's not in the district but can look at the whole system with open eyes, you know, to support all the people who need to be part of that process, including the child care programs, families in the communities, you know, and how they are getting themselves ready for this. So it's more of a stakeholder process in each district and not just kind of put out on the community that this is how it's going to happen.
And one of the things that I think about is how will we know when something is going wrong? So my one thing that could happen, for instance, is the legislature, I don't see this happening, but the legislature could say, by 2 years from now, you will take on these kids. And if we don't, how will we know if somebody is not ready and we're about to transition a lot of kids to a program that's not ready? So.
And how, yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. Hi, Gail.
Hi. I know we're talking about the CDS children with IEPs, but I think the schools, as they're looking at their capacity, they also are going to be taking into consideration just their regular ed kids who are eligible for pre-K. So I think that and I don't know where this fits in, but there needs to be, you know, when looking at numbers, it's not just CDS kids, it's the regular ed kiddos too that need to be kind of figuring into this capacity issue for SAUs.
So let's think about what the question is, because I hear you and I appreciate you thinking aloud about this. DOE staff, is there a way to help us frame this question? Thank you, to get to the.
Could I ask before you go there?
Sure.
Consider least restrictive environment. You need kids without disabilities, with children with disabilities in order to be able to get the least restrictive environment. If you're just thinking about kids with disabilities, you're going to be missing a core piece of what IDEA says. And that really goes to what Gail is talking about. But I will, I'll stop.
Thanks. Gail, does this get to your point?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Heather, and then Lori.
I apologize. I don't think I put my hand down from before.
Oh, no problem. I wondered, but I don't have put hands down capacity today. So you're on your own. All right, Lori, and then Howie.
I was just reflecting on having an evaluation process, which of course we all want to have this kind of optimal evaluation process to determine if a district's really ready to take on their children. But the cold hard truth is that CDS, as much as we don't want things to get worse, they probably will, and they already are. I mean, Roberta has said a couple of times, we have over 100 vacancies within CDS. More people are leaving all the time. I think there are many employment opportunities for educators, whether it be ed techs or for teachers within public schools and other places. And it's scary to think about, you know, things changing. And so I'm very concerned about there being a lengthy transition time because, you know, it's not like moving from the ideal into something that's unknown. Right now, things are very, very tenuous, and there are many, many children waiting for services that aren't getting any services right now. So to me, like, we have to evaluate, can the district provide at least comparable services to what CDS is doing? Maybe it won't be ideal at first because change takes time, but it's very hard right now within the CDS system. And I do anticipate, and I think my colleagues would agree within CDS, that it'll probably get worse before the transition happens.
Thanks, Lori. Does the way this is characterized capture your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Howie again.
Hi, I don't know if this question fits here or not, but I'm curious about how Head Start fits into all this. And because we have Head Start collaboratives, I believe. I mean, we have one in our district, but they're around Maine. But then they also have Head Start, I don't know what they're called, Head Start centers, right? That are that must also serve 3 and 4 year olds. And so it just got me thinking in terms of, you want to evaluate the progress of how it's going for public schools. I just didn't know where Head Start, there's a lot of money there that we wouldn't want to, federal money that we wouldn't want to have disappear because we stopped using Head Start.
Is Head Start 2 words?
Yes.
That doesn't
Yes.
look right to me. Okay.
Heather, I'm just noting that in the chat, you put the DOE early learning team has great resources on partnering for pre-K delivery. It would be great to see these included in these SCAU steps and have those resources expanded to include special education and specific partnerships. Thank you. Lori? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Anyone else want to weigh in on this before we transition to our next point? Howie?
So one more thought is the comment was made, you know, how will you know if an SAU is ready and we can't drag this out too long? sometimes it's helpful if there's some kind of incentive to actually move yourself along, to be ready. And I don't know what those incentives are, but I do know there's the regional service center model, that if districts formed a regional service center, we actually got extra money in our subsidy. And so it seems like there might be a place for a regional, if you haven't established a regional service center, might be a good time to do it with another district so that you can more easily service these students. And if you already have a regional service center, then you can expand it to, I don't know, to try to service these students, particularly the 3-year-olds, I think is going to be challenging. Just a thought. Again, I don't know if it fits under this topic, but sorry.
Oh, no, we'll sort it all out later. It's good to capture it. Thank you. Tiffany?
And I would just add to this same bullet, is there a role for private preschools in the development of regional service centers?
Thank you.
From an
All right. Okay, so DOE, CDS staff, these questions, are they answerable? Thank you, Lauren.
I believe they're answerable. Roberta, I've been typing, and so I'm like trying to making sure I capture everybody's thing isn't the same as comprehending what the questions are, but they look all like things that we can provide.
Right, except for we wouldn't have any control over incentives right now. We might have to be involved in the development of incentives, but we wouldn't say right now that we have incentives in place that could do that, but it could be part of the process. So we wouldn't have that information available at this point, but it's absolutely a good idea to capture and to consider.
So for those who posed this, is it possible to say, could a model include incentives? Everybody okay with that? All right, because then we can start to imagine that. Thank you, Tiffany. Oh, okay. It's Monday. I know how this goes with those hands. All right.
All right, let's go to the next slide. And we might actually be ready to have some conversations about the next 2 slides. So because we've spent quite a bit of time talking about 3-year-olds, they need to include a recommendation regarding whether to provide services to children with disabilities who are 3 years of age through a quasi-independent agency or through a school administrative unit or a hybrid system, and a description of whatever necessary resources, steps, and benchmarks and barriers to any transition of services. So they're not being asked to plan for it with the same rigor as they are for the 4-year-olds, but they are being asked to do a recommendation for 3-year-olds. Let's go to the next slide. And next slide after that. Keep going. There it is. So we were provided this earlier. So some options for 3-year-olds. Perhaps we could just take a few minutes and talk about what we think. Tiffany, did I interrupt you?
No, I just put my hand up. I would just probably want to start by saying, though, that I think that there have been changes in the understanding of the option 2 model, and that it seems to have been taken off the table, which would leave us with one option to choose. I think that in the hybrid model, it turns out that the FAPE obligation would still fall under CDS, which is not desirable.
Let's invite CDS. Erin, do you want to speak to Tiffany's point?
Yeah. Tiffany, this model reflects that we would have a hybrid model until the SAU is ready to take over the 3-year-olds. So in the straw poll that we did on the call, and this is an opportunity for this whole group to say whatever you would like about that. But it is not that this model doesn't reflect that the hybrid model is off the table. It reflects that we would have a model where 3-year-olds were supported how they are currently being supported until SAU is ready to transition. Now, I will tell you that currently there are SAUs that are programming for their 3-year-olds in their catchment area. So that's why it's hybrid in option 2, because some SAUs are already doing it. But this kind of reflects not that hybrid model is taken off the table, but that we would start with that CDS doing everything, SAUs doing some portion, starting to learn about these kids, maybe even just attending IEP meetings, whatever that would be. And then at some point we would phase the oversight and FAPE responsibility to the SAU.
So is it the case then that under this option 2 hybrid model, the FAPE obligation is actually CDS, not SAU?
It is right now until it's not, right?
And that's the option 2.
Yeah.
It stands as written right there, except that the FAPE obligation is.
I'm going to say SAU/CDS because it's in transition, or maybe in transition. Or maybe because what people weren't interested in is providing the same that we're providing now. And they also talked a lot about adding additional transition points if there was an intermediary agency between early intervention for me and public school. Does that make sense, Tiffany? This is
basically both of these options are still on the table, period.
Period.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the question is what do you guys think about these things? Where do you think 3-year-olds should go? What are some positives and negatives of things? What are your thoughts?
Sarah?
I mean, I think that if the SAUs are going to take over for 4 to 6, that it does make sense for parents with transitioning that they just go from early intervention into special education, and they don't have to have that additional kind of middle ground. But I also think that's a lot to put on the school districts. So I think it is going to need to be the hybrid model until school districts are equipped to do that, and until we can figure it out with the 4 to 6-year-olds, and then we can look into moving the 3-year-olds.
Thanks, Heather. And I just want to acknowledge, I'm going to go back to the other slide once we're done. Okay. Heather, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, because there are some districts that are kind of piloting this already due to, shortages in staffing. I would love to hear from them or from DOE staff if they know how that's going, to know, does this feel feasible for a time being? And the other piece where the hybrid might give some potential to transitioning CDS staff to the school districts is you're also building those relationships in this hybrid model. So those staff are starting to already start to work together. So it might be a good natural transition for those CDF staff maybe looking to move into an SAU position.
Thanks. Denise?
I was just thinking that, which is a little bit out of the box, so unusual for me. Wouldn't it be great, depending on when that 3-year-old actually turns 3, if there was somewhat a a flexible type of transition year when that child was 3. So depending on the child and the family and the school, so that the school was getting to know this child, and this child would be able to access maybe the current program, and then eventually some of the school program, and then eventually all school. It just would depend on the child and the needs. I don't know how
Just
that
to
would
give
look.
you, just to give you a little bit, Denise, to kind of expand your thinking about this. Some of the SEUs are sending itinerant staff to private placements to provide special education services and their SAU employees.
Excellent.
So again, I want people to not think that if an SAU is responsible for a 3-year-old, that 3-year-old would have to walk into a public school building. I just want people to understand that that is something that we have heard loud and clear, many people are uncomfortable with. And so that is, there has to be options. Some schools might have a space that could have a 3-year-old program, and it would be, but I just want that understanding to be clear for you in your thinking about this.
Thanks, Erin. Let me just quickly jump in and say, Jamie, to Sarah, you were commenting on the hybrid model. I think it would be that Jamie, you agree with Sarah. You think it would be a burden on parents to have 2 transitions in a little more than a year, but SAUs will need time to get set up for that. I have other reasons, being a parent of a current 3-year-old who is in Part B, for thinking that ultimately transitioning to the SAUs will be the most efficient way to handle meeting their needs. Thanks very much for that input. Gail?
I'm thinking that if the FAPE obligation for 3-year-olds was with the SAUs, this is a wonderful opportunity for SAUs to partner with private programs. I think that happens in many other states where they're responsible for the children, but they're not in the public school, because as we all know, putting a 3-year-old in a public school, putting a 3-year-old, there's a lot of things that have to happen at the school to accommodate these little children. So I think it provides for an opportunity to really partner with some programs within the district that can provide programming.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this at this point? Okay. Tiffany?
Are you looking for another straw poll?
I don't know. You're the co-chairs. Are you ready for that?
It's up to the co-chairs, Tiffany.
I mean, I will say, this is from a facilitator perspective. Is it possible that people need the data that you've identified before being able to do that? I'm not sure. I'm the queen of process, right? But I'm in charge. I'm the decider of nothing. I don't know. What do you?
I mean, I think that sounds great to have more information for sure. I think each straw poll, is just kind of a pulse taker. However, we have also heard loud and clear that, the department seeks our specific thoughts on this topic. So I was just bringing that up.
We could do a thumbs up exercise if you want to do that. And it's totally up to the co-chairs.
How about we give you a true opportunity to have some polls next time with some thumbs up with some very clear questions, and we'll send them out ahead of time so that you know what we're going to be asking you. Would that be okay? What do you think, Tiffany? Do you think that works? All right. All right, good.
Okay, then I'm gonna, before we move ahead, I'm gonna swing back to the previous slide. We had a question around Heather, and thanks Nina for flagging it and keeping us honest. Go back one more, if you will, maybe two more, to the last place where we had input. One more slide back. Okay. There, Heather, check it in.
I think just the reference, it wasn't CDS has great resources. It was DOE, the early learning team.
Thank you very much.
And I think the only other thing is that could those resources be built out for partnering in special education too? So essentially the resources help districts guide themselves in partnering with community programs, Head Starts, private child cares, and they're really great resources to help superintendents and other folks look at how that happens. And then, but I could see there would be an area too where that could be built out more with some of these special education services in the partnering.
Great.
Thank you, Nina.
Team, go team. All right. Now I think we're ready to move on. Nancy, do you want to take us to the?
Yeah. I missed a slide, didn't I? Oh, well, this is some of the options for 3-year-olds, just so that we can look at it. Go back to there, because I missed that slide and I should have done that slide ahead of time. That was an oopsie for my part. Just to make sure we have covered everything that's on the slide. If SAUs are taking over the 4-year-olds and additional middle, oh no, you wrote that.
That's right.
I
These
am
are the
totally after a hockey weekend. Forgive me. Next slide. So this is the proposed timeline thus far, but my understanding is that we're going to be getting a more robust timeline coming up between now and next time. Do you have any, Aaron, will you give us a heads up about what's coming our way?
So we do have a, again, we have a very detailed timeline associated with the legislative report. And so it has, like the bullet capacity, right? Like that's a loaded word. It means a lot of things. So how are we going to look at that? What do we already know? What do we need to know? Those kinds of things. So they are broken down a little bit more. As you all know, we already have a lot of hybrid pilot sites happening right now. So more information is going to be provided on what's happening now. And then we have the plan is more broken out into each of these areas. But overall, given that we still have, a tremendous amount of work, even though these are, one line words here, they're, to determine capacity is a large issue. So just wondering how people are feeling about this 4 years. 30,000 foot perspective, I would say.
meaning, yeah, go ahead.
Meaning, so between, yeah, Howie.
So the 4 years are from right now until 2025. We're calling those 4 years.
Yep.
So right now we're already planning for budget-wise for next year. So I feel like that needs to be taken into account. Superintendents start in November, December. So I I don't want to say it's too late, but I wouldn't count that as a year, if possible. And so to me, this timeline is extremely fast, and I only see 2 years worth of planning, not 4. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. So 2025 seems pretty fast to me. Now, some districts, it might not be a problem. They might be almost there, but I imagine some districts are not even close. So I was kind of hoping for a timeline that was, it just kind of depends on who you are, kind of a timeline with incentives and pressures to and support and all that kind of thing. But to have everyone in place by 2025 seems challenging. That's my thought.
Thanks, Howie. Roberta, are you responding to that?
I am, and I think that just a quick note that that's the hybrid, Howie. I think that the hybrid might extend or could extend. That might be one of your questions, that the hybrid could extend beyond those 4 years, depending on the readiness of an SAU. That's all I wanted to say. I don't know that it's hard and fast, but I think every SAU will have its own temperature taking and readiness availability for accepting those children into their SAU. Just that thought.
Thanks. Denise and then Tiffany.
Just a quick question. I'm wondering about the timeline. So when it says 2022, are we talking as of January 22 that starts or finishes, or is that for the beginning of the school year of 2022 and going to, I don't understand what that means for 2022 and 2023. Is it?
Well, it's already starting. It's happening. It's January 2022. It's actually been happening, right?
Right.
But
right.
so but it's happening now.
So is the expectation then that the items listed under 2023 would either begin before January of 2023 as the other items get completed and then move forward to that year with the items under 2023?
Oh my gosh.
I'm very, step 1, step 2, step 3, as you know. So I just don't understand if
I think it's
a deadline or a beginning of those
it's
tasks.
very, let me just say, I think it's very fluid, Denise, as
Okay. All right.
I think it's just very fluid.
Right.
These are things that need to happen, and we're trying to get some of those things. Some of the things have already happened. Some of the things are about to happen or could be about to happen. And some things will continue to happen even right through 2025. So I think it's very fluid.
Okay.
If that's helpful.
That's very helpful. I think that's actually good because of the flexibility that it offers.
All right, I'm just going to throw in the mix that Deb Mullis, you put in the chat. You believe the intent was to consider fiscal year as the benchmark. Thank you. Nancy?
My vision of the proposed timeline is it's not clear enough for me to understand exactly how it's going to go. When is it going to go into schools? Responsibility? What are we expecting from schools? I also want to acknowledge this is a proposed timeline because nothing can happen yet really until the legislature provides authority to do it. This is the legislature's call to provide this direction, which is really important. I'm also concerned that it's going to go too slow from an advocate's point of view because there are so many children not getting their needs met. And I think it just puts us up at risk of higher costs, human as well as capital, of children not getting early intervention when they enter. If there's higher costs of not providing good quality Part B 619 services as soon as possible, and we need, it also puts us at higher risk of lawsuits if we don't get it all done. because it's a responsibility, especially those wait lists. They're not okay.
Are there wait lists now? Yes, I'm seeing nods. Okay. Thanks, Nancy. Heather, you added to the chat, has there been a statewide survey to SAUs to see where they are at or where they could be in this potential timeline? For example, as Howie noted, budget planning timelines will be taken into consideration. So that is a question in front of us. I think Sandy, you were next.
I just have to say that for special ed directors, Aaron has been pretty clear about this for a very long time. So I've already had those conversations with my superintendent and admin team about what was coming up. And so I actually have a meeting, I think tomorrow, with Roberta to really formalize that timeline for the districts that I'm in so that we can keep this on track. And just to echo what Nancy was saying, really our goal is to do what's best for children and families. And this is how the public schools can work together with CDS currently to support that in light of what's happening with the wait lists and staffing, et cetera. Because we are seeing it in public school. We are paying the price for the gaps in the early intervention. So the sooner that we have a plan, the better it's going to be.
Thanks, Sandy. I just want to do, Tiffany, you had your hand up and you put it down. You're good. Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Sarah and then Pam.
I think I just agree, coming from CDS, that we're just not able to provide in the same way that the public schools are able to, and that to fix that and to kind of provide the amount of staffing and services that CDS would need, it's just such a huge monetary impact that could be better spent by supporting the public schools as they take on this new role. So I think if we look more into how do we support the SAUs into taking this on and collaborate together versus how can we extend the time that CDS is going to be solely responsible, is a better way to do this.
Okay, thank you. Pam?
I just wanted to point out that in New York, we have some districts providing special education classrooms to 3- and 4-year-olds, and they're experiencing the same staffing challenges. So I don't think that issue is going to completely go away just because it shifts to the SAU. It's still going to be a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that it might even become more of a challenge. I know from Head Start's perspective, SAUs typically can pay more. And so we have some really great staff that, choose to leave because they can make more money. And so I know that right now we have a severe staffing shortage to operate some of our Head Start classrooms. And I'm a little fearful that, if more staff leave, then it's going to leave an even bigger gap.
Okay. We have time for one more comment. Roberta, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and then I'm going to begin to transition us out in the name of time.
No problem. I just wanted to remind everyone that 28 does identify kindergarten and pre-K already, that kindergarten can include 4-year-olds. So it's already in statute that pre-K can exist in the SAU.
Thank you. And with that, there may be further discussion, along this line. Given the time, I am going to transition us, and thank you for your participation and attention and preparation for today for my role, and turn the floor over to the co-chairs to talk about next steps.
Great. I just really want to say thank you. I'm interested in the feedback. Does everybody have a better understanding about what we're doing And is there any questions that haven't been answered? Great. Then the next step is to get answers to our questions. So when we meet again, which is going to come very quick, we're going to get things in writing ahead of time so that we can process it. And then we'll have an opportunity to respond and talk about it. And then our third meeting really is going to be, so what additional advice do we have? And we are charged as a body to actually come up with some recommendations. So we have a report ourselves that we need to write and write down. I have no doubt that while we are charged to advise the Department of Education, that we will also be asked to speak to the legislature potentially as well. And if that's the case, it's very important that everybody is on the same page of what this body agrees and believes in, so that if Tiffany and I are on the hot seat, we're talking for the body as opposed to for ourselves, which is not our role. That's really important. So this time we're asking questions. Next time it's going to be getting answer and beginning to look at what advice we want to make. And then third, we're going to see is there a consensus that we can make on some things, and what can't we reach consensus on, and have that acknowledged as well. It is okay not to reach consensus, but it is important to know why, so that when somebody says, why didn't you reach consensus, there's a clear answer. Cool. Tiffany, closing remarks?
I think I'm all set for today.
All right. Then I just want to say thank you. And I hope this was satisfying and productive use of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.